Staying on the Raiders quarterback topic here, we uh, we're in this predicament where Tom Brady. I guess since you have left, he not left. Since you went on vacation, we did. We haven't recorded since we've recorded last. Tom Brady has retired, um, and so that was actually one of our probably number one options, at least from what the organization has reported. And so now that leaves us with not a ton of options as far as who's going to be the next QB1 for the Raiders. And Aaron Rodgers obviously has been a lot of the front of the news as far as who the Raiders are going after. And it sounds like Hondo Carpenter, I believe is his name, reported that like once Brady decided to retire, is a huge kind of like a blow to the Raiders. And really if we don't get Rodgers, then it's going to be kind of like a swing and a miss on the offseason, especially on the decision to move on DC, right? So, any thoughts on like Rodgers and the kind of like what you've seen as far as like the trade packages or just the percentage of Rodgers being with the Raiders, and also like we joked a little bit too, or I joked, he did go on the Pat McAfee show 2 days ago, and saying like he's going to take like a 4 day darkness sabbatical. I don't know what it's called. It's like basically 4 days in the dark. He's going to figure out whether he wants to play next year, what his future is. And so it's like, what are your thoughts as far as Rodgers is like, is if this could not even be more ambiguous, like here's a situation like Rodgers is our only option and he's going into the darkness for the next 4 days to figure out where his life's at, so like, so now give me your analytical take on like whether you think Rodgers is a fit. So here we go.
Well, it's perfect because this is so like 0 dark 30 24 from LeBron when he goes to the playoffs and he just shuts off all social media and then just likes fat booty pages on Instagram. But anyways, uh, yeah, I think it's at this point it's such a Rodgers thing to do, you know. I think. I think it's weird because the situation for getting Rodgers, like the amount of money that he's owed, on top of like what draft capital it's going to take, I think maybe you can figure yourself out in there in regards to like not as much draft capital because his contract is so high. But I've seen so many things of people just like including Carr in this trade package for Aaron Rodgers. And people don't realize that they don't want Carr. Like the whole reason they would get rid of Aaron Rodgers, not only because he doesn't want to be there anymore, but because they drafted Jordan Love in the first round. And at some point they just got to give him the keys to the car and say, like, can you drive? Not to Carr the car, but Love the car. Like the Chevy Love. They gotta give Love the keys to the Chevy. Boom. We made it there. We got around to it.
Yep, we did it.
Anyways, so I think that's one thing that is a little tough is just trying to figure out, okay, that's twice as much as what we're taking off of the books from Carr. So that he's essentially owed. But I I feel like there's probably so many different little like nooks and crannies you can adjust to like make it viable to trade for. I didn't have enough brain power over the last few days to like just try to go over that or look into like how can this structurally make sense for both teams or whatever. But I mean, hey, screw it. Let's go all in. Let's bring Devontae's quarterback back over. The biggest thing I'd be excited about this, besides Aaron Rodgers coming to our team, is just getting to like talk crap to Ruben, one of my really good friends who's a Packers fan, and like getting to talk to him about like now we have Devontae. He loved Devontae so much, and now like if Aaron Rodgers just came over here, it'd be like we're just like gradually sucking in all of their good players. It would just be fun to talk ish to him about that. Ruben, if you're listening to this, I love you, bruv. But I would love to take a quarterback as well. So I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
bring him over.
interesting. Yeah, bring him on over. It's interesting, but that's kind of where we're at on like big like veteran splash at this point with Brady being gone. So um, I did have one question. Actually, where are you at on all this? We'll get to that first. I do have a question for you when we're done with this, but where are you at?
Yeah, you can give me the question if you want, because I'll probably talk so long that you won't have a chance to even ask the question.
Okay, so with Brady retiring, so much pointed to Brady potentially coming to the Raiders, right? Um,
Mhm.
all offseason after everything kind of went down the way it did. Do you think Brady finally retired because he realized I'm either coming back to the Bucks or I'm going to the Raiders or the Jets? And like a negative, like as much as bringing the Raiders or the Jets out of the dirt and mud that they've been stuck in for so long, like negative success with those teams would you can't tamper on his legacy, right? People kind of said that about Brett Favre too, at first, and then he went to the Jets,
They went the Jets.
and then he started doing other things too that didn't help his case after football. But um, you think Brady retired because he was just like, from here, it's like still a couple more year process, and like going to the Raiders would change everything about the whole Brady Patriots like um, relationship with the Raiders, the Tuck rule situation, all that kind of stuff would,
Mhm.
it would kind of like take away from the aura of that. On top of the fact that if he failed, does that tarnish him a little bit? I don't know. It was just something
Yeah.
that I was thinking about. Like,
Well, I think
did the
it's
Raiders
yeah.
make him retire?
I mean, maybe right. I think when you look at it, it's like I think his options were. I don't think he was ever going to go back to Tampa Bay, right? I don't think. I think he knew what that team was, and also like they're going just as far as like contracts go, like they're going to be in a rebuilding phase for a number of years, right? Brady could change that, but he didn't, right? When you look at the Jets, the only thing would be like, hey, do I want to go and try to like shove it to Bill Belichick like twice a year? Being in the AFC South or AFC North. No, what the heck are they? South? How are they in the South,
Who?
by the way?
Who?
The the Patriots and the Jets in the AFC
East.
South.
AFC East.
Oh, East. Gosh, I'm like North, South, West. Yeah, okay. Being the AFC East, it's like he might have just wanted to shove it to Bill Belichick there. And also, like in 2020, there were links to Brady going to the Raiders. But I do think that number one, he's old as shit. And then also he was just like you said, I don't think there was a team that was now like outside of like the Niners where that would have been like a dream scenario. And maybe they vetted that out and said honestly, they're not willing to move off of Brock Purdy or Trey Lance or whatever it was, right? Like to actually decide like whether they wanted to bring him on or not. Like if they're ambitious and they want to do it, they would have just done it. But that's kind of where they are. So yeah, I think we can chalk it up to the Raiders and the Jets made Brady retire and fine, right? Fine. Like it would still been like a weird signing, even though it would have been perfect for the Raiders because they wouldn't have to trade anything, which is what we're getting into with this Aaron Rodgers situation. But yeah, I think the Raiders did force Brady's hand, and it's about time we got something over on him because you know he's hurt us in the past. So, but as far as Rodgers is concerned, I think it's such a fascinating situation. Like the Raiders basically have to be under 60 million in the cap, right, to actually be able to bring on Rodgers. Now, how they structure that, and he even mentioned with the Packers or in the future, he's open to restructuring the deal that he has. So with that, it's like you could say, okay, well, Rodgers is worth a first and a third and a second next year, whatever you want to call it, right? It's like, well, no, not necessarily because it's all about what his worth is to the Packers. And so the Packers are like, dude, we're trying to get him and his salary, just like flip it in reverse, like Missy Elliott, right? Flip it and reverse it. Like if we're in the same situation as Derek Carr, it's like we're trying to get his salary off here and get whatever we can. And he's not Aaron Rodgers. I'm not saying the same thing, but like it's a similar situation where we're moving on. I think the Packers are moving on, right? And so as far as compensation goes, which I think multiple reports have came out that like we could easily get him for a mid-round pick of this year, like a third or a fourth, whatever, which could be what we get in return with Carr, which also could be the salary cap that we get in return for Carr, which would allow us to then take on Rogers' contract, right? And then we'd be able to actually negotiate with him and figure out how it doesn't directly impact this year, and we could spread it over the next couple of years based on a 2024 roster bonus kind of deal where it's like you got to be on the team and not be like going into fucking hiatus. for 5 days next year because you want to add a day. It's like, so there's a lot of different ways we can spin it, but I do think ultimately that Rodgers is kind of this. The Raiders don't get him. I don't know what we're doing, and I think a lot of the fan bases, we don't know what we're doing. And I'm not saying that I was like, hey, this is the only way to fix the team, but like with all the momentum and all the buzz and kind of like our decision to put our foot in the ground with DC, like this is where we're at, right? And so Brady retires, we're getting rid of DC. If it's not Rodgers, and we can probably expand on this on another episode, but like, what are our options, right? Is it Jacoby Brissett? Is it Baker Mayfield? Is it Stidham and Chase Gabbers and then draft someone? It's like, what are we actually doing, right? And so like where the aggressiveness of the organization, which might end up backfiring, especially if Rodgers decides to retire. I think the only thing, sorry, I told you I was going to go off on a tangent, but the only reason I don't think Rodgers retires, and it was on Twitter, but I'm like, this makes a ton of sense, is the fact that he doesn't want to be inducted in the Hall of Fame with Brady. It's like he wants his own like limelight. So it's like it's 5 years after you retire, and so Brady retired this year, so in 5 years, first ballot Hall of Famer. Everyone knows that. If Rodgers does the same thing, it's like, here you go, Aaron Rodgers, Hall of Fame career. And moving on to Tom Brady, let's spend the next 27 minutes on him. It's like he might just want to wait a year. You want to wait a year? Come on over, dude. Las Vegas, super sick, right? No sin involved at all. So, anyways, it's just like I think that it's Rodgers is a pipe dream, and also like if we don't get him, I don't know what we're gonna do, and that sucks. It kind of sucks, but there's a lot of different ways we can go, and like there's a lot of different ways to spin as far as like, well, it doesn't make sense to do this. And like, yeah, I get that, but I just like this thing with moving off of DC. There's going to be a ripple effect if the organization is not able to pull off a move that is a win now, where the players like a Josh Jacobs that is willing to take a franchise tag as long as we build around this team, and a Max Crosby and a Darren Waller, like those guys can be gone. I'm not saying Max would be, right? But we could easily say if we don't land Rodgers that we could franchise tag Josh Jacobs. He's gone next year. Okay. We're gonna end up trading Waller. We're gonna end up trading Renfro. We're gonna, you know what I'm saying? Like we're gonna be in a spot where we won't be able to create this buy-in of this win now team that is like fully like, if we get Rodgers, we're fucking rock and rolling, right? But if we don't, it's Stidham. It's like, I'm not saying Stidham's bad, but like that type might have a ripple effect of like where the core pieces of our team might end up going. So all that to say is we're kind of in this like, we better get Rodgers or we're screwed. Sorry, Ruben, but we might be screwed here, dude. So please give this to him for cheap. Thank you kindly.
We're in such a Raiders position to be in, is what we are. I mean, it's such a Raiders position to be in. But do you think that we are in a situation where it's Rodgers, top 2 quarterback in the draft, or bust situation?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I think if it's not Rodgers, like no free agent will be able to bring us that sense of hope. And so the only thing would be is to, like you mentioned, get a top 2 quarterback. Let's say we get a Stroud. I don't think we're gonna be able to trade for Young, right? But we get a Stroud, or even Levis blows up the scouting combine and get enough buy-in there, and he has a production that turns around as a week 1 starter. I don't know. I think we are in that situation, to answer your question. Like it's just, it just is what it is. Like outside of like you somehow bring in a Lamar Jackson that doesn't fit the offense, like okay, it's like there's ways to make these things happen. But at this point, like you could really rule out a lot of options. Say it's either Rodgers or we sign a vet to compete with Stidham, and we just try our best at rebuilding this roster in the draft and in free agency, and hope to God we can keep a Devontae Adams happy, and hope to God we can't be tempted to trade, Darren Waller, right? So it's like, or that would also depend on like, okay, well, if we're not going to be able to win in the next 2 or 3 years, we're not going to re-sign Josh Jacobs for a 3-year contract. We're going to franchise tag him and no one let him go, like that's, and then we'll get compensation back from him. So there's so many different ways to spin it. But like to answer your question, yeah, I think it's a Rodgers or a drafted QB that is going to be able to be ready week 1. That's going to instill some kind of, we can meet this window, and if not, we're royally screwed, my man.
I know
royally.
I know I keep just like extending things. And we've got some NFL props to get into, but last question, promise last question. Even if I have more, I'll hold off. Do you think there's enough there? I think McDaniels, Ziegler, I think they're going to be here next year no matter what happens. For the following year. We talked about this already, right? Do you think there's enough there for them to say, well, look, we were going to go on Brady and then he retired. And then we were going to go on Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay wouldn't trade him for something that made sense. Like, the plan is to rock him and we'll go after our quarterback next year. And like that's the justification to be like okay with the situation. Do you think there's enough like, well, we were gonna do this and we're gonna do that, but things outside of our control like didn't allow us to do that. So like this is like a void year when it comes to like being a knock on their belt for not succeeding.
And you're saying as far as like Josh McDaniels and Ziegler's security, correct?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, because it's like
Mm.
it seems as if right now it's like they need to do something or they're going to be gone. It's like that's what a lot of people are saying, and I
Yeah,
don't know.
no,
That's
I,
not what
I
Mark
agree with
Davis
you.
is saying yet, but it seems like they're in a very much like they need to make a hit on something this year, maybe next year. They need to do something. They have to have a plan for the future, and so like the thought was Brady, he retired. The thought's Rodgers. Do they not have enough to like do that? Is it too out of the realm of leveraging the
Yeah.
franchise? So.
No, I mean, I feel like if this was like a San Francisco Giants situation when it's like you know, you had Aaron Judge and then he
Carlos
didn't sign, and,
Correa.
and then you had Carlos Correa and then he didn't pass physical, right? And then you ended up not signing anyone, right? It's like that would be a different story when it's like, hey, our options were three and it got dwindled down to one, right? And like Brady's gone, Rodgers doesn't get traded, and yeah, I think that there's no way McDaniels and Ziegler, in a sense, could even look at Al Davis and say, like, what are we supposed to do here? You know, like they conclusively made the decision on DC, and then it's like here we are. So it's like, yeah, they would totally get like a hey, we'll draft a rookie, and as long as you hit on that rookie, like you'll buy yourself another 2 or 3 years, in that sense. So yeah, I think it could be a void year for these guys, especially if we don't land Rodgers. And in a sense, like I don't know how Mark Davis could even conclude that that was like they're the guys to fire, in that sense. Like when it's like, yo, dude, like our options weren't many. We kind of pushed all our chips in because you're in Vegas, right? And then you just the dealer had a four and he flipped over a fucking seven and he hit a 10. It's like, dude, like that's where we're at. So I don't know. I was trying to make
I
a blackjack
love the
reference, but
reference. Love the reference because that was a lot of what we dealt with when we were out there and we were playing blackjack. So
that's true. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.